When you've got countless writers working on numerous comic storylines, crossovers and details will overlap time and time again. For the most part, this is fine and just adds to the lore of the world or the characters themselves. Yet, as you might imagine, with so many threads being drawn, sometimes they get tangled. Hence why most comic book publishers love a good old retcon from time to time. Basically a big old event to tidy up the loose ends and keep everybody happy. Or at least that's what's meant to happen, as throughout history we've seen such efforts at cleaning house causing damage to the foundations. With this in mind, I'm Jules from WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 most hated retcon changes in Marvel Comics. Number 10. Puck is a mystical prison. Let's start off small, ha ha ha, by talking about the pint-sized punch artist of the Canadian supergroup Alpha Flight. Now, Puck was always written as a character who suffered from constant pain, something which was later attributed by the creators as a result of the condition achondroplasty, a common cause of dwarfism. But Bill Mantlo later took over Alpha Flight and decided that wasn't sufficient explanation for Puck's stature. Instead, he rewrote Puck's origin story to read that he was once a 7-foot-tall adventurer who stumbled across the Black Blade of Baghdad, a scimitar that contained a spirit of an evil sorcerer, Razir. Over time, Razir's spirit weakened Puck, shortening him to just over 4 feet over time and almost killing him until the Canadian hero's own light or some other cheesy gobbledygook defeated him. Puck became a living, breathing prison for Razir, thus explaining his constant pain, although it did extend his lifespan tremendously as he was born in 1914. But sometimes the simpler method is just easier. Number 9. Dum Dum is an LMD. Dum Dum Duggan is an absolute unit. Mustached and more loved than a used sex doll, the big man debuted back in 1963 and has been cropping up all over the place since. That's the kind of longevity you don't mess with, but in 2014's Original Sin, his entire backstory was thrown in the f***ing bin as Nick Fury told him that he was in fact a life model decoy, aka a cheap man's android. The worst thing is that Fury has used this excuse time and time, reducing many loved characters to simply robo-buddies, usually before one of them gets killed off for cheap thrills, which is exactly what happened to Dum Dum, and Marvel was robbed of their only character who pulls off a bowler hat with a modicum of class. For shame. Number 8. The Sentry. There's really not one specific alteration or retcon in the Sentry's publication history that strikes as the worst. More so, we're instead referring to pretty much its entire existence as being worthy of a spot on this list. The main issue is that the Sentry is powerful. Too powerful, if anything. Robert Reynolds was a meth addict, who through his own nefarious intentions got access to a super soldier serum replica that turned out to be way more super than anyone had thought, and as his origin story says, gave him the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns! Long story short, with a power this crazy, the Sentry himself was to lead to one big retcon. His character was actually rewritten into titles such as the Fantastic Four, the Incredible Hulk, and Spider-Man in order to make him feel legit for the build-up, so that they could have him sacrifice himself in order to rid the world of his equally powerful alter ego, the Void. All those team-ups, friendships, built over several issues but portrayed as lasting decades, gone. His history was as confusing as it was brief, and while he's been brought back a few times, his existence was merely to trigger a big event and then leave. You're welcome, I guess. Number 7. Scarlet Witch's kids were real, then fake, then real again. From one super psychopath to another, let's talk about the Scarlet Witch and her extremely odd relationship with her offspring. Despite being an android, the Vision and Scarlet Witch managed to have a pair of sprogs called Wiccan and Speed. Things were all looking fine and dandy until it turned out that Witch's powers had actually created the kids out of thin air. Whoops, must have been a surprise to the Vision. Then, because the writers were all like, nah, that's silly, they then said that the kids were actually pieces of the soul of the demon Mephisto, and when he tried to absorb these pieces of the soul, it killed him, and this reincarnated the kids. Wait, what? What? So they were real, then they were magic, fakery, and demon souls, and then real again? God, this is as complex as the witch's feelings for her brother, who might actually be the dad. No, you know what, we're just moving on. Number 6, Teen Tony. The less said about Tony Stark's retconning into a teenage version of his former self during the mid-1990s, the better, but alas, here we are. During the 1995 crossover event called The Crossing, it was revealed to the Avengers that Iron Man had been a pawn for some decades of Kang the Conqueror. So, therefore, we got an evil Tony, and we all know that fire is beaten by more fire, so they hopped back through time and brought a young Stark to the battle, who won and then took over the role of Iron Man in the current day. Okay. Whether it was down to poor reception or just because Marvel's writers got bored again, the Heroes Reborn reboot basically made all of that defunct. Superpowered reality ultra Franklin Richards brought Stark back to Earth 616 as the version he best remembered it, and yep, you guessed it, it was almost like as if nothing had ever changed. All that stress for nothing then. Number 5, Wolverine Origins Retcon number 181, Romulus. This one is so obsessively dumb. So, right, we're all in agreement that Wolverine is a mutant with adamantium fused to his bones by the shady souls behind the Weapon X program, right? Good. Except, no. In 2007, we were introduced to Romulus, an absolute shitbag that decided to make Wolverine's life a misery. He killed off a load of his love interests, he took credit for being the guy in charge of the Weapon X program, and he also kidnapped his son, you naughty monkey! However, the silliest thing came not from what Romulus did, but what he said, as he informed Logan and audiences everywhere that Wolverine was not a mutant. What? Wolverine, according to this, was actually a descendant of an ancient race called lupines who evolved from wolves instead of primates, meaning that he was actually more closely related to Sabretooth than any of his ex-friends. F***ing hell. Number 4, Captain America is a Nazi. Anyone who's been keeping up to date with Marvel over the past 18 months or so will likely tell you that Captain America's reimagining as a Hydra sleeper agent is the most offensive thing to happen in comics since they showed how MODOK goes to the toilet. What, you missed that issue? It was a ballsy move to say the least, taking Star-Spangled Steve Rogers and literally painting over the red, white, and blue with a swastika. It took guts, but then again so does shoving your hand into a spinning blender. The change lasted all of a hot minute though, as the Cosmic Cube was brought in to rewrite everything and has now left that side of Marvel a little bruised and embarrassed to say the least. When in doubt, get the cubes out. Number 3, turns out that Jean Grey wasn't the Phoenix after all. Jean Grey's relationship with the Phoenix Force was responsible for some of the biggest moments in X-Men history, not least of which was her death, which came about when she realized the Dark Phoenix mega powers were residing inside of her, and then she took her own life. It was really, really sad and left a lot of readers with a gaping redhead-sized hole in their hearts. Except she wasn't dead! She wasn't dead at all. In fact, Jean Grey had been preserved by the Phoenix Force in a handy-dandy cocoon at the bottom of the ocean of all places. Who didn't think to look there? Xavier? Was it you? And just like that, our favourite firebrand of all time was back. Comic book writers, it's almost as if they don't care about our emotions or connections to the characters at all. Number 2, One More Day. Aunt May Parker is pretty much a superhero in her own right because she pretty much refuses to f***ing die. Peter's love for his aunt is matched only with his love for MJ, and both have been used against him time and time again by his enemies. Yet when Aunt May is sent to hospital and she looks like she's finally going to bite the big one, Mephisto offers Peter a chance to save her by cashing in his relationship with Mary Jane. Now, most people would respond with, "Nah, thanks mate, she's had a good innings, I'm just going to pop off home with the wife," and then just go home happy. Yet that's exactly what the writers needed him to do because they wanted to reset the Spider-Man universe. It did not go down well, but at least it sorted out a few dead ends and gave us the MJ-Peter dynamic that fans had grown up knowing, so you know, swings and roundabouts, I guess. And number 1, Gwen Stacy has twins with Norman Osborn. 1973's The Night Gwen Stacy Died featured one of the most well-chronicled deaths in comic lore, as Peter Parker saw poor police chief's daughter, not to mention the other great love of his life, have her neck broken before his eyes, partly as a result of his own efforts to save her with webbing. It's one of the toughest to take deaths in the character's history, and the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Stacy has always held something of an angelic status since. Well, the Marvel editorial team came along and said, screw that, and just gave her 2 children. Originally, they were meant to be Parker's spawn, but at the last moment, it was switched to Norman Osborn. What? As in the Green Goblin? Why? The move sullied Stacy's good name and was a particularly bitter pill to swallow, as it was thrust upon a character who had been long dead and could have avoided this altogether. And what did Osborn do with them? Well, naturally, he took them under his wing and trained them to be assassins to kill Spider-Man. Thank you, Marvel. You f***ed up big. And that's our list. Got any other retcons which ruined Marvel's storylines? Well, let me know about them in the comments section below. Then why not swing by whatculture.com for more news and articles like this every goddamn day. As always, I've been Jules, you've been awesome, and I'll speak to you soon.
Whoa! Sick, son! He's my son! That was sick too! You made it through to the end of the video and that was pretty rad!
It was amazing. We're so happy.
That's so great! Yeah. You did it! Like, share and subscribe below for more amazing content like this!
More videos on our left!
And some on our right! And you can see who made this video here!